I wanted to do one more presentation on Hinduism, focusing on religion as a response to what we want, and then the Hindu response of the four yogas. This, I think, these are a couple of the core ideas in Hinduism. Earlier, I put up a presentation on some of the basics of Hinduism, and a lot of that might be considered outer trappings of the religion. I think the core ideas here are pretty interesting, and something that we as outsiders to this religion can appreciate. I should say up front that uh, the ideas in this presentation come from Houston Smith and his analysis in his World Religion text. That being said, according to him, Hinduism from the beginning says that we can have what we want. And so then that leads into the follow-up question, so what is it that we want? Now, this is an interesting approach to the subject of religion. It situates religion within the context of what we as human beings want out of life. And at a certain point, religion comes into the picture. Hinduism doesn't start with denying anything that we want as human beings, as we'll see if you read the text and if you follow this presentation. Smith identifies two different divisions in terms of following what we want. And the idea is that there's a kind of natural progression that we go through in terms of what we want, what we desire. The first division he calls the path of desires. And again, there's nothing that we desire that has to be denied from the beginning. So it seems like everybody starts from wanting a pleasurable existence. Maybe it's more prominent in a younger age than it is later, but throughout life there's sort of a wish to have a good time, to feel good. And if you follow pleasure exclusively, we call that hedonism. There's nothing wrong with pleasure. It's a question of how much importance or significance you give it. Some of the drawbacks would be that it's just for myself as an individual. Pleasures are fleeting, they don't last long. And in order to keep having them, you have to repeat them, so it's kind of can be repetitious. Once you reach a stage in life where that's not enough, I mean, that kind of existence isn't enough, you might want to move on to what's identified as the second stage in this first division, and that would be trying to make something in terms of the world, of our existence in the world, so we could seek worldly success. And these items are pretty commonly put as goals in our Western ways of seeing things. The Western world embraces these. And the main ones are wealth, fame, and power, that different people might feel like you've made it, or you have everything that you need if you have sufficient wealth, or if you're famous, recognized enough, or if you have power, that these are goals that people seek. These, just like with pleasure, worldly success is also can be elusive, and it's also uh, based a lot on competition, which means that it's not so easy to share, that it's in order to be successful in the world, it looks like you have to do better than other people or pass other people up. And secondly, it's these types of values or goals in one's life are often said to be insatiable. I mean, people are greedy, or they don't recognize when enough is enough. So people always want more. People who are wealthy rarely feel like they have enough. They always want more. People who are famous always want to be more famous, known, recognized beyond what they are, and also power. It seems like there's no a kind of endless need to always want more, not to accept, not to see when enough is enough. Thirdly, in there's still too much of the self in thinking about these types of things. So that will lead us to the next division. An interesting feature of religion is that it generally sort of has to do with lessening the significance of one's own self. So this, how do you situate your interest in yourself and sort of not be totally consumed by that, but to open to a larger world or a larger reality. So for Smith, then, if you've passed through the level of concentrating on pleasure, and you've got the worldly success that you're content with, you might want something more. And here in the second division has to do with uh, kind of letting go of some of this self-importance or self-interest. And the first stage in this division is community. To become a member of the community where it's not just about yourself anymore, but you feel like you're part of a larger whole in the sense of a community. This might be uh, thought of like when one decides to start a family or to get married and, so to say, settle down. And then, life can't be so much just about yourself at that point. So you have to care about the other ones, the ones you're committed to and love within your own family become just as important as yourself, if not more. So that's another stage, and it has to do to some extent with the renunciation of just my own self-interest. If one moves into this stage, one of the rewards is self-respect and the respect and gratitude from others as well. So then you might be at a point in your life where your existence is enjoyable, and you've got the degree of worldly success that you're satisfied with, and you become a member of the community. And so in a way you have everything on the worldly level that you might want, but you might still have a question such as, is that all there is? And or maybe you just feel like there should be something more than what you've accomplished up to this point. It's at this point, you might say properly, that religion begins, and this is the stage in Hinduism. It's identified as liberation. It's an interesting way to phrase and interest in religion as kind of liberation or freedom. So, but that's kind of the way it's framed within the context of Hinduism. So in this stage, you can re-ask this question where you feel dissatisfied with the ordinary achievements of life and ask yourself, what do you really want? And you get down to the essentials about this question. And you could say that what I really want is just to be, to exist. And that means to exist without having to die. Without limitation. So there's a kind of drive within us all. To exist, to continue to exist, to live. We also have a desire or a wish. To understand, to have knowledge. And again, we want to know without any limitation. And I'd like to know everything, actually. I might acknowledge that that's difficult to imagine, but still there's this yearning sort of to understand. And finally, this term joy, which goes back to the idea of pleasure, but this is at a higher level. Again, to feel, happiness and pleasure and joy, about one's existence. And one doesn't want that limited either. So these are kind of essential items that everybody would like to have, and ultimately what we want. Hinduism acknowledges these essential things that we want and maintains that you can have them, just like you could have all the other things that you wanted. So being, knowledge, and joy are available for us. And we don't even have to look outside ourselves, but they're available within ourselves. So the argument is that they're buried deep within and covered over so that we're not connected with them. But nonetheless, being, knowledge, and joy all exist sort of within ourselves deep down. There's reasons why we're not so aware of that, because a lot of things stand in the way of connecting with this inner realm within ourselves that it keeps us from feeling that it's possible for us to have the things that we really want. And you could say, try and characterize what those obstacles are. First of all, we're attached or identified to our finite sense of ourself, our bodily self, and we feel that that's this concrete experience of myself in my body, and seems so undeniable. But maybe that's an idea which doesn't tell the whole story. So, from a Hinduism point of view, is that we don't really know about this inner realm within ourselves, and thus we're ignorant of what our true possibilities are and what our true nature is. We're restricted in space and time, or we feel ourselves restricted in space and time as a result of these ideas we have about ourselves, which may not tell the whole story. Religion, then, from a Hindu perspective, is how can I get what I really want? And so in Hinduism tells us that there are 4 different paths that you can follow that will take you to where you'd like to be. And so we're not restricted to just one path, but there's different paths which are suitable for different kinds of people in a way. All of these paths are referred to as yogas. This is clearly a little different meaning of the word yoga than the one that we're accustomed to, but in this sense, each of these paths is a kind of yoga. And the meaning of that term is two senses. First of all, it's to be under a yoke, like an oxen is yoke. Put a yoke on an oxen, or in order to pull something. So in that respect, to be under a yoke is to carry a burden or to pull something, to be under a load. And secondly, it includes this idea of being joined to something. So a yoke joins the oxen to the plow or to the cart and so forth. So it's under a burden, and it's also joined. This, reminds us of how we tried to characterize religion at the beginning, that there's this sense of being connected to something. So yoga has this sense. And again, there's different types of yogas corresponding to different kinds of people. From the beginning, it doesn't matter which of the yoga paths you follow. I mean, there's a kind of preliminary to follow any of them, and you have to be basically a good human being to even begin. The first of the yogas is Jnana yoga. And we could say this is a path for reflective or intellectual people, way of knowledge. It may be that this approach is similar to the way we educate ourselves here in the West. There's a lot of belief that you can learn things through study with the mind, and that so you read and you study and so forth intellectually. And then ultimately you're supposed to be able to put that into practice in a practical way somehow. But here, Jnana Yoga, that's for this type of person, intellectual kind of person. And you say it's the way of knowledge. And arguably, it's the shortest path to get to the goal, but it's also the steepest. How to understand that? Why is it the steepest? And why is this suitable only for a few people? One of the peculiar things about this, on this path, you're supposed to make use of the mind in order to accomplish the goal that you want. But part of the goal that you want is to put the ordinary mind out of play. And it's because we have automatic ways of thinking about things, or ordinarily thinking about the world and ourselves and so forth. It's one of the major obstacles to opening up to some different understanding of who and what we are. So this idea of trying to use the mind in order to overcome the mind has a certain kind of contradiction built within it. So regardless, I mean, this path is suitable for some, and it involves all the things we associate with learning. We listen, we think, we ponder, and in general, if you have the theory, you have the ideas about what's possible, and you have the idea about what's necessary in order to achieve your goal, that you try to make it a reality. So it's like you realize that you're kind of stuck in some sort of illusory world of the self, and so you want to try and separate from that in a way to open up to your true self. And the true self would be connection with Atman. And when you become connected ultimately with Atman, that's the way you would become connected with the representative of God that is within yourself. A much more common form of yoga, or a path that a lot of people tend to follow, is called bhakti yoga. And this is a way to follow for emotional people. You'd say it's a way of that involves feeling. Primarily this idea of the love of God. That's a kind of emotional connection with God, and being guided by that, by the emotion of love. That's a common religious practice in a number of religions. So you could comment on this, that this type of religious yoga practice has to see God as other. That, like you could say, Jnana yoga sees God as being within yourself, buried deep within, and you're trying to make contact with the divine within yourself. But in Bhakti Yoga, I mean, if love and devotion is the key way in which you practice this love, you kind of have to see God as not within, but outside myself, that God's out there, and that in order to be the object of my love, God can't be myself or even within myself, but it's more that God is conceived as out there somehow. So that's a interesting difference from Jnana Yoga. See, they're both within the context of Hinduism, but some different ideas emerge when you look at the specific approaches. Also, in this form of yoga, in order to relate to God or to devote oneself to God, it's accepted that God should be loved in some kind of lovable form. Or so you can have an image of God. And a lot of times Hindus might have a little shrine within their home with a particular divinity focused on, and then rituals would be performed in front of this object or divinity. And it's it's not that one would believe that Shiva is like a separate god from the ultimate god, which we say was Brahman. But when Hindus worship, either Vishnu or Rama, Krishna, and sometimes even Buddha, I mean, it's not as though they believe that's the ultimate, but it's a way of that. It's a manifestation of the ultimate that's being worshipped. Or when you worship an image, it's not God itself that is the image, but it kind of represents the ultimate divinity, and it's a way of approaching the ultimate divinity as well. Well, the third kind of yoga is called karma yoga, and again, this is the use of a word that means like different things to us, but in this case, it means a kind of path that you could follow. I mean, for people who are active people, or people who aren't inclined to a way of feeling or a way involving intellectual study and so forth. So these are for people who want to live their lives but still have a religious sensibility as well. So it's a kind of working in the midst of your ordinary activities in order to be related to the divinity in the midst of all those activities. One example I've always enjoyed was that of a cobbler, story of a cobbler who feels like he's connecting himself to God with each stitch he sews, and when he's sewing leather anyway. So you can use whatever your craft is or whatever your occupation is. You somehow use the conditions of your craft as a basis for trying to be related to the divinity within yourself. You see, this can be trying to be related to the divinity within yourself. That would be kind of Inanna, or a divinity external to yourself as a way of loving God in a way. And you'd say that's the bhakti sort of approach. So karma yoga can be either, on the Inanna side or on the bhakti side. I'm not recollecting clearly at the moment, but I think in the other video that I asked you to take a look at, the Professor G one on the 4 yogas, that I believe he indicated that karma yoga might be the most actually commonly practiced form of yoga. So for people who try to be religious in the midst of their lives, we would say that's karma yoga. Finally, we have Raja Yoga, sometimes called the royal way. And it's the type of person that's suitable for this. It's a little hard for me to understand or to identify, but in the text it said it's for experimental people, or it's a way that involves psychological exercises, kind of like a hypothesis that you're trying to verify or to prove. So these are people who want to, seeing is kind of believing, maybe. So in order to see, though, you kind of have to give it a try, get involved with it and so forth. So you conduct an experiment, you try, and you see where it takes you. This is a pretty significant form of yoga, as we'll see. I mean, it becomes involved in a number of the other religious teachings that we'll take a look at. In particular, this path is, to a pretty large extent, is involved in Buddhism. Also, later, I think in Taoism as well, you'll get this idea. The same ideas that are involved in this kind of yoga are involved in those other religions that I mentioned. The aim of Raja Yoga, as we've already said in Inanna Yoga, is to take you into the inner world, to move us, or the practitioner, from the outer layers of the self progressively into the inner layers of the self. And the thought is that you pass through 4 different layers in order to get to the inner core of who you are. And those layers, the first one is the body. Second one is the level of the mind. Thirdly, the subconsciousness. And then finally, being itself. So in this sense, you're trying to move into the inner world. And you have to pass through the world of the body, and pass through the world of the mind. And then arguably, you can enter, if you follow the path successfully, you enter into the world of the subconsciousness, and then ultimately into the realm of being itself. So everything is contained within. There are, passing through these 4 layers, there's like 8 steps in this Raja Yoga that one would try to go through. And for the most part, they're different forms of meditation. And again, one gradually, has to work one's way through them. And it involves, struggle to overcome the distractions of the body, struggle or work to achieve a level of attention which is capable of concentration and focus, and control over the mind and the mind's tendency to wander and so forth. It ends up with the state called samadhi. And I haven't listed all 8 of these in the text. They're there in a way, but it sort of starts with the outer, so with the body, and gradually moves within. So this work with the body is like if you try to meditate, you overcome the body's need to constantly be moving and kinds overcome the distractions that are associated with our bodily existence. We're all pretty much familiar with some of the meditation postures uh, that people learn or try to practice. We're familiar with the sitting position, the lotus position, and others. And a lot of this is what we would ordinarily think of yoga is like a stage within this process. So this work with different postures, and you could say that the aim is to open the practitioner up to deeper levels of relaxation and awareness within the body. So the focus becomes more and more inward and kind of oblivious to the external sense world. And at a certain point, there's struggle to uh, to bring a kind of discipline into the mind. It may be that that's the struggle, is to bring a kind of discipline into all these different dimensions of ourselves. Say the mind is a little bit like a monkey, sort of hard to discipline and control. Monkeys go wherever they want. Ultimately, the theory is that you reach a point where the knower and the known become one and the same. The knower and the known. So there's no distinction between myself as the knower and what it is that I know. You could say in the Western philosophical parlance, that's idealism. And this experience, the ultimate idea is you become one with God. Atman and Brahman are one and the same when you become enlightened.